It's kind of customary for a channel like mine to do a Q&A video at some point in its lifetime, which is kind of what this is. But this isn't questions from my comment section or from any of my other social media accounts. These are questions that I've had on my mind for a while, and for one reason or another haven't made into actual videos. Usually because of time. I'm a very busy person nowadays. Making videos has taken a bit of a backseat. That's why my upload schedule has been a bit wonky. Sometimes it's because I might have a question where the answer isn't quite meaty enough to fill up an entire video. Sometimes I just haven't really had the time to research a video properly. I would want to dig a lot deeper into these things, ask friends of mine, research. Because the types of questions that I'm answering on here are to do with how we learn music, how to teach music, but also doing music as a career. There's unfortunately quite a lot of bad information out there, and I want to be kind of direct about this stuff. Honest, straightforward. I've tried to be as unsugarcoated as I can be, like this is how it is, you know. So I hope these questions and answers help you out. Let's jump into the first one. Yeah, I've actually heard more than one teacher say that. It's usually guitar teachers. You don't often hear piano teachers saying that, but I've heard a piano teacher say that also. Scales, man, are difficult. My view on scales is that we shouldn't just write them off. They are a very useful exercise, but the key word being exercise. You know, it's fascinating to me. I think scales for most of us are not fun to do, and I think that's where the problem comes in, because they are not usually fun. They are hard work also, by the way. When you start out, they're hard to do. Like you'll struggle with them. You'll watch someone who's been doing scales for 10 years and they'll just fly through them, and then you'll try them and your fingers will be tied up and it'll just sound awful. And the thing of it is, it's a scale, it's not even a song, you know what I mean? So it's like, what are we even doing here? Why do we have to learn scales? And I think for teachers, it's a very difficult sell to our students, because like, you know, here's some exercises for you to do, 60 minutes a day. And by the way, you'll probably only start to see results after like a year. I mean, it's, you know, how do you sell that? So it's very difficult to teach kids scales, to get kids to practice their scales. And I've had students, by the way, potential students come to me and ask me, listen, I want to learn guitar, or I'd like to learn piano, but don't teach me scales. Don't teach me music theory. I just want to learn how to play. Scales are useful. That's the key thing here. I believe they're very useful. I do kind of feel like, and this is just a personal view of mine, we might just be stuck in a bit of a rut in terms of scales. I'm talking now if you do formal piano, you know, Royal Schools, Trinity College, that type of thing. Maybe things have changed since I had my lessons 20 years ago, but the way it worked was you learned your major scales, your minor scales, arpeggios, and broken chords. Finished. Right? Now, also granted, I only did up to grade 4, so there's that. But my point is, it's not that much variety. We've been learning the same stuff for hundreds of years. And again, it's because they are super useful. But unless you're going to do something specific like jazz or blues, for instance, you're not likely to be taught pentatonic scales and blues scales. You're not likely to get taught different modes until you hit your later grades, which, let's be honest, most students don't make it past grade 4, you know, regardless of what instrument you are learning. In fact, most students, statistically, if I'm not mistaken, quit within the first year. I think it is. So again, it's a difficult sell. How do you convince a student to practice something that they probably won't even still be practicing? They probably won't even still be learning or taking lessons by the time they start to show rewards. just really quickly, the benefits of scales is not just memorizing notes. They build stamina, they build strength, they build precision, they improve speed. There's all sorts of mechanical benefits, muscular benefits from learning scales, from practicing scales. But again, it's a difficult sell. This is another one that annoys me a little bit because it represents a misunderstanding of what music theory is, or rather its function in music. The way it was described to me one time by a music teacher who I respect a lot is it's kind of like someone starts to talk to you and you recognize almost immediately that it's their second language. The language that you grew up speaking is their second language. And you recognize this because of the fact that, for instance, they put an S onto a word to make it a plural, that's not how you would normally make it a plural. Or they say something, they put a sentence in the past tense, but they do it wrong. Now, you can still understand what they're saying, but you can tell that clearly they've learned by talking to other people. They've picked up things here and there, but they haven't properly studied grammar or the rules of how your language works. It's a similar concept in music, where you play with someone who, they're not bad. I mean, they've got the skills. There's certain things that they're very polished with. They might know certain songs exceedingly well, but give them a new song and they're going to struggle. It's going to take them a lot longer to learn that new song than someone who's actually studied music theory, who's actually taken the time to properly learn how the instrument works. I feel like music theory, it's not just about memorizing a textbook. It can feel like that sometimes, especially when you really start to dig into this stuff. It can feel like you're just memorizing text, but it's more than that. It's understanding conceptually how music works. I mean, you might know by sound what a C major chord sounds like, but do you know what that chord actually is? Music theory is knowing that C major chord is a C, an E, and a G, and understanding, firstly, what do we mean when we say a C note or an E note? And then why did we specifically choose C, E, and G? Why didn't we do like C, D, and G? Or because if you did C, D, and G, that's a C too. Concepts like that help us to communicate a lot better. If you're playing with someone else, it's very useful, believe you me, trust me on this, super useful to be able to communicate with your bandmates what you're doing and what you expect of them to do. It helps you to understand what you're playing a lot better. It'll make learning new songs a lot faster. That's a benefit that I feel doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The speed at which you can pick up new songs skyrockets when you have an understanding of music theory, because you'll listen to something and you'll be able to pick up on the fact that, that's this kind of chord progression, right? It's that kind of run. It's that kind of arpeggio. He literally just played a blues scale there in the key of G minor or whatever it is, right? I mean, and now you didn't have to memorize all the notes that made up this scale. You already know that scale. That's the benefit of music theory, is it makes things easier. It really does. But it is hard. I say hard. It's not really that it's hard. It's a lot of work. It's actually, music theory is not hard. I must be honest. It just takes work. And you got to find someone who can teach you thoroughly from step 1 to step 10. I sort of have jumped around a lot, and that's why it's taken me a long time and it hasn't been that easy. But if you do it properly, you'll find it's a lot easier than you think. This, like a lot of those kinds of statements, is an oversimplification. It's the kind of thing that is normally said by people who have heard you play and feel like you've got some talent, you've got the gift. They want to be positive. These are people that are trying to motivate you. It's well-meaning, but it's not quite true. In a sense, it is true. You do need to work hard. You do need to practice hard. But the reality is a lot more nuanced. Now, I'm saying this as someone who has had a small taste of success. There was a short period of time in my life where I didn't have to phone to try to get gigs. I didn't have to audition. I didn't have to beg anyone. I, for about a year, had people calling me. Exclusively, people were phoning me and asking me to play at certain venues. I toured a bit, I played some festivals because people were calling me. I didn't have to market myself. But the truth is, to be successful is a combination of things. Essentially, you need, first and foremost, opportunities. Now, it is true that sometimes you can make opportunities for yourself. I mean, one good way to make opportunities is to go out there, approach venues. Hey, can I play at your venue? You know, find open mics, folk clubs, get a job at a music shop. These are all valuable ways to mix with other musicians. More importantly, to mix with venue owners. That's your key thing here. You want to find people who own venues. They are the ones that are going to be paying you after all, not other musicians. Other musicians are useful in that if they have a gig and they are looking for a guitarist, for instance, you might just come to mind. Opportunities, a large part of that is luck. We have to be honest about this. Unfortunately, a lot of this is luck. I mean, the thing of it is, how do you get known, all right? How do you get to a point where people trust the fact that you can play well unless they've actually heard you? Well, and how do people hear you if you're not getting gigs? So breaking into this thing is the difficult part. You have a way of putting yourself out there. Now, social media is a huge advantage here. Everyone's able to put their content out there. Of course, the problem with that being is that we are absolutely inundated with content. There's millions of videos being uploaded every day. So I'm not sure how useful that is by itself. I think it's useful if you can find a way to target that, you know. I mean, you can spend your life marketing yourself and approaching venues and have nothing come of it just because it's the wrong timing, or you don't make the kind of music that they are looking for, or it's just, you know, you happen to see them on the wrong day. When I think about the kinds of gigs I've gotten and the luck that was involved there, just happening to approach a certain restaurant at the right time, that they just happen to be looking for someone to play piano. It just happened to be good timing. You know? That's luck. That has nothing to do with how well I can play. That's luck, pure and simple. Let's not ignore that situation. In fact, the people that are hugely successful, the 0.1% of pop stars out there, I don't think we realize how incredibly lucky they are. But the important thing here, the one key point to make is that that doesn't mean to say that they aren't skilled. What I found is that the older I get, the more I work on my music, because when that opportunity, if that opportunity presents itself, I want to be at the best that I can be, right? Because if I get an opportunity to play somewhere, I want to be playing the best I can possibly be playing, so I can take the full advantage of that particular opportunity. My problem with this piece of advice is it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's not that simple. It's actually, for starters, pretty good advice if you know what you're doing. If you've been playing for many years, it's reasonable advice to give, right? I mean, you all have different body shapes and sizes. You might be kind of tall, in which case you need a slightly bigger guitar. Maybe you have a large stomach, in which case an ovation is not going to fit for you. The round back is just going to keep slipping off you. Maybe you have small hands, so you tend to go for thinner necks. These are personal preferences that matter, but that you're only really going to know about if you've been playing for a couple of years. If you've never touched a guitar in your life, how do you know what the right guitar is? I mean, how do you know what's meant to feel good? I can add to that the fact that when you start out, guitar just feels uncomfortable to anybody just starting out. You know, regardless of which of these guitars you pick up and try out, it's going to feel uncomfortable because you're using muscles you've never used before. So to say just grab a guitar that feels good for you, that's very useful for someone who's experienced, who's been playing for many years, because you know what works for you. And don't get me wrong, there are certain things that's fair enough. I mean, if the neck is a little twisted, that's a problem. if the top is bulging a bit. There are certain things that are non-negotiably wrong, or rather that can be non-negotiably wrong, arguably wrong with the guitar, 100%. But you still have to know what you're doing to be able to identify those things. Where I think this piece of advice comes from, I think the intended implication when someone gives this kind of advice is sometimes those of us who are very experienced and have been doing this for a long time, we maybe tend to overthink these things, and we tend to try to apply too many measurements and variables and scientific method, and it's like, I get it, but at the same time, sometimes it's better to just shelve those ideas and just sit down and play the thing. And if it feels right for you, play it. And this extends to sometimes we get stuck on brand names. Just because something is a Fender doesn't automatically mean it has to be a beautiful guitar to play. Fender isn't incapable of producing a bad guitar. I may have said something sacrilegious there, but you get what I'm trying to say. We're all different. So I think that's where the idea of play what feels comfortable comes from. Very useful if you're experienced. Doesn't help you at all if you've never touched a guitar in your life. This, I think, stems from the idea that someone will watch someone playing on TV and be absolutely blown away by the way that Eric Clapton can shred, for instance. Maybe not the best example, but you get what I'm saying. We start to feel intimidated, or you decide you want to learn and you meet up with someone who can play and you get intimidated because they are so good. And it feels like I could never reach that level. My main question for this whole point is, do you have to reach that level in the first place? One teacher that I knew compared it to driving. Now, where I'm from, we don't have a very good public transport system, and so everybody, when they turn 18, gets a driver's license. But most people are not professional drivers, racing in Formula One or rally races. Most of us are not stunt drivers either in Hollywood or on film, but you don't hear people complaining about that. I've never heard a person complain about the fact or make the point that, I don't know that I should learn to drive. I'll never be as good as Verstappen, for instance. That's not a thing that people say. Yet we say it with music. I don't think I should learn guitar because I'll never be as good as Van Halen. You see what I'm trying to say here? The comparison I'm trying to make? Do we have to be professional? I don't think we do. I don't think we have to do music necessarily to make money. If you want to do that, that's awesome. Go for it. But that doesn't have to be our goal. I think it's perfectly reasonable to learn guitar just as a hobby. I've had students who all they want to learn is a couple of chords, a few basic chords, so they can sing along to some songs around a campfire. That's all they want to learn. And you know what? Give me a couple of months, I'll have you sorted. I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to keep things simple. This one is, look, there is something to be said about age having an effect on things. I mean, you don't see too many people in their 70s taking up mountain climbing, for instance. People tend to slow down as they get older. This is not meant to be a prejudice remark or anything like that. Just the fact of the matter is, as we get older, it becomes more difficult for us to walk long distances, to run, to exercise. Not that we can't, but it's, age affects us all. But I'm not sure it affects us as much as we think it does in terms of music. Look, at the top end, at the highly professional, highly proficient end, there is definitely something to be said about the fact, I have known some highly technically proficient pianists who, as they got into their 50s and 60s, there were certain songs they just couldn't play anymore. Well, they say they couldn't play them. Let's be honest, it's not they couldn't play them, it's that they couldn't play them to the level they were used to playing them. But again, this is like your top level, like highly technically difficult songs which require a lot of flexibility. You have to have put in years and years, if not decades, of practice to get to that point. to get to the right skill level to be able to play the thing in the first place. Yeah, fair enough. Age might have an effect on that. But to learn just in terms of a hobby, I don't think age matters. I don't think there's any reason why you shouldn't learn. There's a lot of people, right? We get a lot of customers walking into here who have reached their 60s, who have retired and now finally have the time to learn to play something. And some people might want to learn to knit, some people might want to learn a sport, someone might want to learn art or chess or all sorts of things. These people decided they want to learn an instrument. And I think it's a fantastic thing. I've heard people go from never having touched a guitar in their life, at 65, 10 years later, they're actually proficient. So age, technically, if you want to get really biological about it, sure, it has an effect on things, but it doesn't mean you can't learn. This goes hand in hand with the idea that click tracks make you sound robotic, mechanical. They take away your creativity. On the other end of the scale, you've got people that swear by click tracks, that claim that if you don't use them, your music is going to sound terrible. You'll never be able to keep time without them. Your music's going to sound very unprofessional. I think what's happened is, as time has gone by, we've sort of taken to two different extremes rather than trying to navigate a sort of a compromise. I personally couldn't care less whether you use a click track or you don't. You do whatever works for you, whatever your preference is. I don't think that click tracks are cheating or a waste of time. Certainly in a studio setting, I find them very, very useful. I know a lot of people will use a click track just to count them in. And then once the track is playing, they prefer to have it off because it can be a bit distracting for some people. I'm aware of that. But I don't think it's something we should just throw out. I think we've got to be careful here not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Let's not throw click tracks out because they're a little bit just distracting. You can get used to them. The click tracks are a tool. At the end of the day, it's a tool, right? It's kind of a similar conversation, although not as debatable as the idea of pitch correction or quantization. These are highly debatable topics. They're tools, and they should be seen as such. This is an example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. On one hand, I kind of agree. There is something to be said with a natural sound. Being able to hook a microphone up to a guitar and just play, But on the other hand, we have been like, how can I put this? So first things first, producing stuff as in pitch correction and quantization, adding reverb, EQing, none of this stuff is new by any stretch of the imagination. Pitch correction, for the record, has been around since the 1970s. A lot of people don't want to believe that. I've had people debate with me that specific topic. They'll say that's impossible. No one used pitch correction in the 1970s. Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but the fact of the matter is it existed. Now, I'm not saying, to be clear, I'm not saying that the Beatles necessarily used it. I don't know whether they did. I somehow doubt it. I'm not even saying that any of the major bands used it. There was probably, there may have been a stigma attached to it, and so it just wasn't the kind of thing that got used by any popular bands. But it definitely existed. It was definitely a thing back in those days. Quantization, to be fair, only came around in the early 2000s, which is quantization, for those who don't know. It's kind of like pitch correcting, but for rhythm. So you're adjusting your timing so that everyone's playing in time. That's something that only really came about in the early 2000s with the introduction of DAWs. But even that is something that's, in fact, actually, quantization is something that nobody recognizes, no one notices. We haven't had a conversation about it like we have had with pitch correction. Pitch correction is a highly debatable thing. Quantization, people don't seem to care quite as much. As soon as you get into that kind of topic, as soon as you start talking with a fellow musician about that, you've got to figure out which side of the fence do they fall. And a lot of the time they fall on the side where they are, to them, pitch correction is this evil thing. Quantization is this evil thing to some of us, right? I just feel like that's taking it a bit too far. Look, you can definitely overcorrect things. We've actually experimented in the shop with pitch correction and quantization, where we have pushed it hard. There are limits. There are definite limits. When somebody is way out, it just doesn't sound like a human being. It doesn't, at least we can tell. I don't know to non-musicians how it sounds. I can't really speak to that, but certainly for us doing this for a living, we can tell when it's that bad. When you correct the occasional miss, nobody picks it up. It's not really noticeable. If it's mostly your own voice, but the occasional note didn't quite reach the correct pitch, so we just click and drag up a little bit, that to me is fine. Quantization is a similar thing. We actually created a drum track purposefully completely out of time, which is a lot harder than you might think it is. And then we ran it through quantization, and there again, same issue, where if there's the occasional beat that's slightly off, you can click and drag it into place. You can run it through a filter and it can make those corrections, but if it's too far gone, it just doesn't work. The software doesn't know what to do with the song. It doesn't know where to place those beats, right? With pitch correction, and the software gets muddled up. It doesn't know where to place those notes. So all of this is to say, let's be careful not to go overboard and just completely get rid of pitch correction and quantization. In actual fact, to me, they are very useful. They can save a ton of time in the studio. You know, it's like I can choose. I can either do this track 100 times until I get it perfect, or I can do it 30 times and take the best track, best sounding track, that maybe has the best tonal quality, but the timing isn't quite right, and I can run it through a filter. You know, if you're working with musicians worth their salt, professionals, their timing is going to be like 99% good most of the time anyway. All right? You won't have to correct much to begin with. Pitch correction and quantization are useful if they don't get overused. That's my personal view on that. Well, that's about all I had planned for this video before it gets too long. I might do this again someday. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope it was useful. I try to be as honest as I could be. I'll see you in the next one.